In this video, we study the 10th chapter of Gospel according to Matthew. Matthew presents here the second major discourse of Jesus, commonly known as the missionary discourse. This chapter forms a very important part of Matthew's Gospel because it shows how the mission of Jesus is now extended through his disciples. In the earlier chapter, we have already seen what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7, and what Jesus did through his mighty deeds or miracles, chapters 8 to 9. Now, in chapter 10, Jesus calls his disciples and sends them out to continue the very same mission. In other words, what Jesus preached and what Jesus practiced now become the pattern and the responsibility of the disciples. They are not merely followers who admire Jesus from a distance, but they are chosen collaborators who are entrusted with his mission. Thus, chapter 10 is not only instruction for the 12 apostles, but also a foundational teaching for the church mission in every age. The first episode here is the calling and commissioning of the 12, chapter 10, verses 1 to 4. The chapter begins with Jesus calling his 12 disciples and giving them authority over unclean spirits, diseases, and sickness. This authority is not their own. It is a participation in the authority of Jesus himself. Matthew then lists the names of the 12 apostles, beginning with Simon Peter and including Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, and others. The number 12 is significant because it recalls the 12 tribes of Yahweh, 12 tribes of Israel, indicating that Jesus is gathering a renewed people of God. The message here is that mission begins with a call. No one appoints himself for God's mission. It begins with being chosen by Christ. Therefore, preaching to others, the disciples must first be with Jesus and receive his authority. The second episode in chapter 10 is the nature of their mission, verses 5 to 15. Jesus then gives the disciples their first missionary instruction. He tells them initially to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This reflects the historical priority of Israel in salvation history. Their mission is to proclaim the kingdom of heaven has come near. Their mission is to proclaim the kingdom of heaven has come near. Jesus instructs them, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. These actions directly continue what Jesus himself was doing in chapters 8 to 9. The disciples are called not only to preach with words, but also to make God's compassion visible through action. Jesus also calls them. You received without payment. Jesus also tells them, you received without payment, give without payment. They are not to turn ministry into personal gain. They must travel lightly, without gold, silver, or extra possessions, depending on God's providence and hospitality of others. The message is very clear. Christian mission is a service, not business. Trust, not self-sufficiency. Generosity, not personal profit. The third episode is mission will bring rejection and persecution. The third episode speaks about mission bringing rejection and persecution. Verses 16 to 25. Here Jesus gives a realistic warning. Mission is not always welcomed. He says, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. The disciples will face opposition, trials, and persecution. Jesus tells them to be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. This means that disciples need both prudence and purity, intelligence in dealing with the world, and integrity in remaining faithful to God. They will be handed over to councils, brought before governors and kings, and even face betrayal within families. Yet, Jesus tells them not to fear because the Spirit of God will speak through them. The message here is that suffering is part of discipleship. To follow Jesus is not a path of comfort alone. Mission often demands courage, endurance, and fidelity in difficult circumstances. The fourth episode in chapter 10 speaks about fearlessness and trust in divine providence. Verses 26 to 33. Jesus repeatedly tells his disciples, do not be afraid. This is one of the central themes of chapter 10. He reminds them, nothing hidden will remain hidden. The truth of the gospel will eventually be revealed. Even the hairs of their heads are counted by God. Jesus uses the examples of sparrows and small birds of little market value, yet cared for by God. If God cares for sparrows, how much more does He care for His disciples? The message is one of confidence. Missionaries may be weak in the eyes of the world, but they are precious in God's eyes. Fear cannot dominate the life of a disciple who trusts in God. The fifth episode here is talking about the cost of discipleship, verses 34 to 39. Jesus speaks difficult but important words. He says he has not come to bring peace in the superficial sense, but a sword, meaning that commitment to Him may create division, even within the families. He says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. This does not mean rejecting family, but it means that loyalty to Christ must become first. Discipleship demands a total commitment. The message here is that mission requires sacrifice. One cannot proclaim Christ while living only for personal comfort, social approval, or security. In the 6th episode, we have the reward of receiving missionaries, verses 40 to 42. The discourse ends with the words of encouragement. Jesus says, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." Receiving a disciple is equal to receiving Christ Himself. Even giving a cup of cold water to the one of His disciples will not go unrewarded. This highlights the sacred dignity of the missionary. The disciple becomes a living representative of Christ. The message is that mission is not only about preaching, it is also about relationships, hospitality, and mutual support within the community of faith. Overall message of Matthew 10 can be presented in the following manner. Matthew, in this chapter, presents the mission of the disciple as a continuation of the mission of Jesus. What Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount and what Jesus demonstrated through His miracles must now be lived and proclaimed by His followers. The disciple is called to preach the kingdom, heal the broken, serve freely, trust in God, endure persecution, remain fearless, and accept the cost of discipleship. This chapter teaches us that mission is not simply an activity of the church. Mission is the very identity of the church. Every disciple is sent. To be called by Christ is to be sent by Christ. Therefore, Matthew 10 remains a permanent guide for Christian missionaries, pastors, religious, and all believers who are called to continue the compassionate and transformative mission of Jesus in the world today. Thank you for your patient listening. May God bless you.